Hello and welcome to the SilverStripe screencast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to manage dependencies in SilverStripe and install modules. So a bit about what we'll cover. We will first just go over a brief overview of dependency management in SilverStripe. Then we'll talk about how Composer works in your project. Then we'll get into upgrading SilverStripe using Composer. And lastly, we will install a module. So if you refer back to our first lesson on installing SilverStripe in your development environment, you'll recall that we did this using Composer. Now, Composer is a package manager for PHP, and it makes our lives a whole lot easier by providing version constraints. It requires peer dependencies, and it never allows our project to exist in a state where two packages conflict with each other. The primary place where you'll find packages for Composer is on packagist.org, and this is a directory where package authors submit links to their code repositories for others to install easily. Many packages are also set to auto-update from their repositories, which ensures that the directory is always up to date with the latest releases. Now, there are two main ingredients to a project that is managed by Composer, and they both sit at the root of the project. One is composer.json and the other is composer.lock. Now, it's very easy to confuse these two files and treat them similarly, but understanding the difference is critical. Composer.json is the file that declares the packages required for your project to run and the range of versions that are acceptable. Now, that second piece is really important. Many composer.json files do not specify an exact release or a commit. They provide boundaries. For instance, you might want no lower than 2.0 and no higher than 2.1. So this allows for opt-in upgrades with a single command. Composer.lock is the file that specifies exactly what commits of each package the project is using. So when your project is deployed or when another user installs your project, this file is used to pull down the exact versions of the dependencies that are currently running on the project. An easier way to think of the separation is that composer.json is used by the composer update command and composer.lock is used by composer install. So let's explain that a bit. When you run Composer Update, Composer will check your Composer.json file and see if any newer versions of each package that are allowed within the version constraints you've provided are available. For example, you've specified no lower than 2.0 and no higher than 2.1 for package A. Your Composer.lock file says you're currently on 2.0.1. Now, Composer goes out and finds out that there is a 2.0.2 and a 2.0.3 release of package A, and Composer will install 2.0.3 because that's the latest version available that you've allowed, and it will update your Composer lock file accordingly to say that this project is now using 2.0.3 of this module. On the other hand, when you run Composer install, Composer will simply read your Composer lock file and download the exact commits of what is specified there. So if a new version of package A is available, it doesn't know, it doesn't care. It's just going to run whatever is specified in the Composer lock file because that is what is currently running on the project. So we don't have any upgrade issues. We're all working with the same set of packages. So there are a few critical things to know when you're running a project with Composer. And one is always run Composer install and not Composer update when setting up or deploying a project. Composer install is going to get all the releases of the packages that are currently running on the project. You also want to make sure that Composer lock is in source control. Ideally, the composer.json is as well, but it's very, very important that composer.lock is, because that is going to let the people who are installing the project to get all the required dependencies at the correct versions. Lastly, you should consider Composer update a breaking change that requires a new commit. Because when you run Composer update, you're updating the Composer lock, and you should ideally do this on a separate branch so that you can test things and then finally merge it in. That Composer update is going out and getting new stuff, and it's going to fundamentally change your project. So that all requires testing. Composer install, Composer update, very different things. So now let's look at the composer.json file in our project. We see that we have some minimal dependencies here. We're running version 3.1.8 of SilverStripe, And this is actually pretty far behind. In fact, a new minor release has come out since the start of this project, so let's get up to speed on version 3.2. As of this writing, the latest release of SilverStripe is 3.2.1. So one option would be to simply change both of these to 3.2.1. This could work, but it's playing it pretty safe. SilverStripe is using something called semantic versioning, which will help us make a decision on what exactly we should specify here. Now, the idea of semantic versioning is simple. Release names are broken up into 3 parts, separated by dots. When the number all the way on the right changes, that means the changes include only bug fixes or security patches. They're very, very minor. When the number in the middle changes, it means that new features have been added in that release. When the number all the way on the left changes, that means there are API changes and backward compatibility is not guaranteed. So you can learn more about semantic versioning at semver.org. Now, SilverStripe has not always used semantic versioning. This is fairly new in the latest release. So based on the semantic versioning rules, we can safely assume that anything beginning with 3.2 will not break our project. So let's use the tilde syntax to specify that. We'll say SilverStripe CMS tilde 3.2.0 and SilverStripe Framework tilde 3.2.0. Now, if you want more information on what that tilde means, you can go to the composer documentation. Basically, what it means is that we're going to get bug fix releases for 3.2. So this will go until there's a 3.3. We'll continue to get upgrades. Now, because we've made changes to the composer JSON file, we need to run composer update to get our new stuff. So let's do that now. Now, this command is notorious for taking a really long time to run. There's a number of reasons why it does take so long, but it's a complaint you hear a lot about with Composer, so just be patient. It will complete eventually. Okay, now we've upgraded our version of SilverStripe, so it's important to run dev build !flush at this point, and we'll see that everything is still working well. Now, as I said, there's no major API changes going from 3.1 to 3.2, so we can say with a high level of confidence that all of our code will work exactly the way it did before. All right, now let's use Composer to install a module. So we want to put a blog on our website. Unfortunately, there's already a great module authored and maintained by the SilverStripe core team that provides blogging functionality. Let's see if we can find it. You could just do a simple search on Packagists. We could go to GitHub, or we could just Google SilverStripe blog, and that should turn up everything we need. But the recommended way to find and discover new modules is on addons.silverstripe.org. Now here you can see all the latest and popular modules along with instructions on how to install them. Searching for blog in the add-ons site gives us a result for SilverStripe/blog. Let's take a look at that. In the instructions, we get a one-line command that we can use to install the module. But before we just copy and paste this into the terminal, we're going to make a slight change. This command declares the version as dev master, which isn't a great idea. We basically would be locked into whatever is on the master branch. And that's often experimental and untested. So a much safer bet here is to use the latest release. If we don't specify a version, that's what we'll get. So we'll just say composer require SilverStripe/blog. Notice how we don't get the exact version 2.3.0. The caret before the version number tells Composer to allow the latest stable release of version 2. So when 2.4 comes out, Composer update will fetch that. Earlier, we used the tilde syntax to allow for bug fix releases in our upgrades. The caret syntax allows minor releases, which is that middle number, right? Now the blog module has downloaded and we'll need to run dev build again. We should see a lot of green as the new tables get built out. We'll want to make sure that this new directory does not get checked into our repository. So it's important to add it to our git ignore file before we make any new commits. Now let's go into the CMS and create our first blog. Notice that the CMS UI has been slightly updated in version 3.2. There are many other important updates happening under the hood as well. If we click on Add New, we will create a new blog, and we'll just create an example post to populate it. So just put in some dummy text here and create our first blog. Now, taking a look at the front end, we do see that this is a bit of a mess, and that's because the module ships with its own set of templates, which don't necessarily get along with the templates we're already using. As we've covered in earlier tutorials, we can simply override these templates by placing templates of the same name in our theme directory. So in the static directory that comes with this lesson, you'll find two new templates. Just copy them into templates/layout in your theme directory and run !flush, and the template should look a bit better now. Alright, that is all for this lesson. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.